What's up, guys? It's your boy Mizzy. I'm here today to review Spider-Man Brand New Day. This is the spoiler review for the movie. I went and seen the movie Thursday night. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, some stuff, I think they could have adjusted, but I'm just gonna rant and just like I said, we're just gonna talk about the film. So the main plot of the film is damage control and Jean Grey. So we learned that Spider-Man learns that Jean Grey, he doesn't learn about her at first, but Spider-Man is the only one because of Spidey senses. When he finds the tank, he sees that something's off because it's an older lady driving the tank. Obviously, something must be off with this. Then he sees something almost like it jumps out her body, goes into somebody else, and then he sees that you know, I already assumed that Jean Grey was the one, jumping in and out of the bodies. I kind of wish I wouldn't have watched a trailer going into this film. I think it would have been even more exciting because I understand, when you show a trailer, you got to show a lot of the same parts to get moviegoers going. But Spider Man is so big, I think people would have went regardless. But like I said, one thing, I'm gonna just like I say, and that's kind of the plot, with damage control, Jean Grey, and then you got Spider Man going through the mutations of him trying to figure out like what's going on, with his genetic makeup. He's becoming more spider like. He's having the organic web now come out of his arms. Like as he would say, I guess other Peter. But and I always preferred it because that made me think like, okay, you got bit by a spider, so if we're going to comic book route, like why don't not have organic web? It just I always preferred it. But like I say, you got Peter dealing with the spider mutation, him trying to figure that out. One thing that I liked in this film for Spider Man, I like him going through investigate like it wasn't like Batman level investigation as far as like the last Batman, but I like Peter, him trying to figure out what's going on. And one thing about the film, I like that Spider Man is kind of he's on his own. A lot of people have complained about Spider Man movies being so any Marvel movie is almost like a spectacle. Like think about Infinity War, Endgame, you got all these characters. This feels more like a solo Spider-Man film. It feels like, okay, this is a Peter Parker Spider-Man. He's in New York, daily stopping crime. He's taking calls. You see him with, stopping Tombstone, stopping Scorpion. It just feels more like okay, this is a Spider-Man movie. And like I said, any true Spider-Man fan who watched even from the animated Spider-Man series to Tobey Maguire to, Andrew, whatever you watch, it's like a Spider-Man gives a certain feel. So like I said, I really like that. It got more back to the what we liked about Spider-Man. Like I said, that was one of my biggest things. Like, I just want a good Spider-Man film. It doesn't have to be this over the top, all this flashy stuff. I just want a good Spider-Man film. So I'm gonna get into Tom Holland performance at first. I think Tom Holland, you know, it'll always be hard. I think, and if you're somebody, 30 below, like if you grew up with Tobey Maguire and you watched those Spider-Man films, I think it will always be hard because we grew up with them films, so you're more biased to like saying somebody else was a better Spider-Man. It's almost like anybody who the original Batman movies, and if you're saying like me that Bruce Wayne was portrayed better by I say the newer Batmans, then some people who grew up with the older ones would be like, nah, what you call, he was the best Batman. And it's almost like Jack Nicholson and Heath Ledger for the Joker. To me, Heath Ledger is the best Joker ever. But if you grew up watching Jack Nicholson, you would be more biased to it. So, like I say, I just want to give Tom Holland props because I think this is his best performance as Peter. Because in this performance, like I say, he can't lean on as many people. Now, he does have Punisher some and Hulk and stuff, but you see Peter more on his own. And I like this movie is probably one of the most emotional Spider-Man movies. He's showing more maturity because he's getting older. You know, you like seeing a character grow. You know, this is the fourth film, like fourth live film in Spider-Man movie. We haven't had a fourth film stretch with one Spider-Man. You know, we had just three films. So like I said, I like seeing that. Okay, Tom Holland is growing as a Spider-Man. I don't know. I don't know if he'll be in a fifth one, sixth one. I don't know, but you know, his performance was great, especially like emotionally when him and MJ their scenes together. I really like their scenes. You know, and I like how, like I said earlier, he's dealing with everyday situations. And you know, far as the probably the number one thing I noticed, soon as the movie came on, I was like, it's a lot of inspiration from the games taken in this movie. The choreography, the acrobatic, like far as the combat, the environmental takedowns, like when you're watching him, the way he's jumping off walls and stuff. If you play any of the, you know, Spider-Man games, you know, the recent ones, as far as the newer generation, you know, Miles Morales, Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, you see, oh wait, this is a lot of the game fighting style in him. And it wasn't cheesy. It wasn't, you know, bad. It was great. It really took it up to a new level. I know a lot of people may not, you know, agree with this, but I do think dang, I thought I had my charger not plugged up. Not sure. I thought my anyways. But I do think this is the best Spider-Man as far as fighting. Now I'm gonna later on, I don't know what day I'm gonna post it, but I'm gonna rank all the Spider-Man movies, so I'm gonna go back and watch all of them. So like I said, I've only seen this movie one time. So when you see movies multiple times, that lets you know really how much you like it. And of course, when you watch it years later, does it stand the test of time? So like I said, this is newer, so we'll have to see how it compares versus the other movies. But like I say, the fighting was a standout in this because you know watching like I say watching all the you know the flips and fight, and then I love the swinging in this film. I love like when they went into his mask. You know, we seen that in the trailer when they went into his mask and he's breathing. It just giving you a whole nother depth of Tom Holland and you know Spider Man. Like you, it's just something about Spider Man. I think everybody loves Spider Man. I never met anybody who doesn't like Spider Man. So like I said, Tom Holland. I think his performance was great, and like I said, I don't know where to rank him for Spider Man. He definitely better than Andrew. Him and Toby, you know, it's funny because I sometimes I want to say he's the best Spider-Man just because he really looks like a kid. You know, it's something about Toby that he didn't give so much as kid, like to me. But like I said, he did play the role great though. So like I'm gonna get into Zendaya right now. So Zendaya performance was really good. I think this is her best performance as MJ. You know, Zendaya is a very great actress, but her as MJ always felt, I don't know, sometimes it felt a little clunky to me. You know, but her chemistry, of course, with Tom Holland is great. I mean, they are married. You would expect it, but sometimes that doesn't translate to on film. But her, like I said, her performance on camera did translate. You know, and it's a complicated dynamic to play. You know, in this film, when she reads the letter, she doesn't remember, you know, their relationship, but when she reads it, you know, and then I'm like, did Tom Holland? She's like, did you leave this for me to find? Because why would you have a letter there and you not want her to find it? I think he did. I think he did want her to find it. But like I said, I think that was a great part of the thing. And then like I said, you know, one thing with Zendaya, she doesn't dominate this movie for her screen time, but the scenes that are on screen time are heartfelt. There's a lot of emotional, you know, a lot of emotion put into the film. You know, she just feels more like MJ. You know, watching Zendaya, I always kind of preferred the original MJ over her. You know, it was something that, you know, when you would watch her, you like, okay, Zendaya, we know is a good actress, but like I say, this movie felt more like, okay, she feels more like MJ. You know, especially if you watch the animated series, even going up to here, it always was something that just felt, you know, just felt a little more. I don't know. It's something that always just felt a little more off. because, like I said, I like Zendaya, especially in, like I say, other films, but this just felt more like an MJ in a Spider-Man movie. So, I want to get into a couple things. So, the hand in this film, the hand was it's I don't know how to say this. Like the hand, I don't want to say they was a bad part of the film because they probably had the best fight in this movie, but it was something that I'm gonna say. So the hand, when we get introduced to the hand, Spider Man, he's at what you call home. Yeah, Spider Man, he goes to damage control, and the hand is there, and then he's like, they thanking him for, he caught the hand, so he's like, wait, what are they doing here? And then they was like, oh, now they're working for damage control, and you like, wait, huh? You like, wait, what? They're working for damage control, and like, yeah, they just needed some guidance. So you're like, wait, hold on. So when Spider Man eventually does fight the hand at the end, it's a great fight. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a great choreography, it's a great fight. But I would have preferred seeing Peter fight the hand when he was actually, catching him. Actually, catching him and everything. But, I guess it was a 2.5 hour movie. You can't fit everything in the film. So like I say, maybe it's nitpicking. But, I think that's probably one of the negatives that I would say that's kind of hurt the film a little bit as far as the villains, because Jean, yes, she's a villain, but her and Peter don't fight. We knew, well, Jean's not the villain, damage control the villain, but we knew Jean, like Jean, far as power, like we know Jean how powerful she is. But Spider-Man, I would have liked to see more scenes of him fighting Scorpion, Tombstone. Like I say, the Tombstone scene was real short. It kind of did like one of those things when movies, they show what's going on with the character. Kind of like, okay, this is going on, this going on. And it was fine, but like I say, I think it just would have been better to see him fighting. It would have been better seeing him taking the hand down while they was, actually the hand, because it was kind of weird. It's like the damage control. The guy was just like, "Oh, they just need a leadership." You like, wait, hold on, that's all they needed, and the hand is done. Like, okay, I guess so. Sometimes you see in films that they just do certain stuff to progress the story. That's almost like Peter when he started mutating. Far as the when he, the spider mutation, when he makes the thing, to make his levels back regular. It's and then all of a sudden, that story part, they kind of breeze through that. Of course he goes talk to Bruce and stuff, but then all of a sudden, it's kind of aftermath. They kind of breeze through it so quickly, and then all of a sudden at the end, if anybody know in the comments, you realize Peter, he doesn't realize it right now, but he's made something that people can use in the future to stop the X-Men as far as their mutation. And like I say, it was cool, but it's something they kind of just breezed through that I think they should have went a little more in depth with. But like I say, it's a 2.5 hour movie. We know, like, you nitpick with certain stuff. You know that everything is not gonna be perfect. We know that, guys. But like I say, I'm gonna get into Frank Castle part now. Now, anybody who likes the Punisher, when you seen that the Punisher was gonna be in a Spider-Man movie, it already made you think like, how's they gonna do that? Because we know Spider-Man movies, they're not really edgy. They're not, especially when you watch the Punisher. Even if you watch the Punisher one-off episode this year, we seen the Punisher and Spider-Man are complete different. Like they're complete opposites. Frank Castle is killing people. It's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Spider-Man is friendly. Even just think about it. Spider-Man in his last film was trying to save villains and give them one more chance. Frank Castle is not giving nobody another chance. He's killing them. So that was already interesting. Like, okay. And they had Frank in this film, he was cursing some, damn this. So they tried to make it like, okay, he's still edgy. And it did work for most part, maybe like 80%. Because like I say, at the end when Frank, he put on the Spider-Man mask and, when he was letting, Peter escape and stuff. It was kind of goofy, but like I said, it worked. It worked. Like I said, I ain't gonna be too picky. It worked. One thing about Frank, I like that they had when he always had that gravelly tone. You know, that almost like Sylvester Stallone kind of like. But I like when him and Spider Man are fighting the Hulk. When he runs in, he's screaming. That was almost like Marvel just thought like we got to give him a scene, him screaming and shooting. So he runs in shooting at the Hulk. He's screaming, and it's almost funny because it was like it wasn't even really called for right now. It seemed like it really wasn't even called for. But like I say, I do like Frank Castle being in this. He wasn't a big part of the film, but it was fun just seeing him and Spider Man. Kind of bounce off each other because, like I said, they're complete opposites. And then, okay, guys, let's get into the Hulk. So the Hulk in this film, man, this really made me, and I wouldn't even say I'm the biggest Hulk guy. This really made me want another Hulk movie because it's been in a weird spot ever since Infinity War, and Infinity War was great. The Hulk hasn't been made like as powerful as he is and as strong as he is. He hasn't been gave like a major role. Like we see the Hulk is just like now you see him getting beat up and stuff. So seeing him in this when Jean takes over Bruce's mind and Spider Man's fighting him for the first time, and then when Bruce changes back, from Hulk to Bruce, and then when he changes again, and then he really rages out and he's massive. We might not seen that Hulk since maybe Age of Ultron. I would have to go back and check, but you see, it's almost turns into almost like a sort of a horror movie. Like it shows like how threatening and how dangerous the Hulk really is when he's this angry. He's taking Peter, slamming him here and there. And to be honest, we all know, like, as far as hand-to-hand combat, Spider-Man would have been dead. Because, like I say, the Hulk is just too powerful. And especially, I like even the slam when Spider-Man was like, I didn't know you could get that big. And, it's funny. It's because, like, Spider-Man, he met Bruce when Bruce was, cause when Bruce did the thing, he could speak, and then he was the Hulk, so he's smaller. If y'all don't know, Hulk changes in size when he's more angry. So, like I say, that was just interesting to see the Hulk like that. And another thing, like I say, I just really want a Hulk movie. I really want a Hulk standalone movie. But guys, like I say, I'm not gonna just talk you to death. But one of the like I say, the negatives. I kind of spoke on it earlier a little bit, but probably my biggest negative in this film was just the villain fights. It was cool watching Spider-Man. Like all the action scenes, the fighting is great. But a lot of the people that Spider-Man was fighting, you didn't care about as much. If he was fighting Tombstone or Scorpion, them are characters that hold more weight in the Spider-Man universe that you care about. When you're watching him fight people like the Hand, and then like I say, it's like a watered down version of the Hand because Damage Control caught him, and now Jean, she's controlling them and she catching them. Like I said, I just would have liked more fights with villains. I think they could have cut some of the fat of some of the chase scenes and stuff and filled them up with more. Like I say, especially catching the Hand. I think that would have been interesting. Them seeing him catch the Hand while there was actually a Hand, and then like I say, they maybe throw Sandman in here. Like I say, you did a short showing him catching Tombstone, but like I say, that's probably one of my biggest negatives. And then, the post-credit scene, I seen people debating, like, what does that mean? Because Ned with the Spidey tracker, it's like all of a sudden you see Spider-Man on another planet. So it's like, is it Tobey Maguire Spider-Man? Is it Andrew Spider-Man? Or is it another Spider-Man from another universe? Who knows? I think we're all guessing at this point. It's a lot of people be making predictions like they're fact. It's people, oh, this is exactly what the post credit scene means, and nobody knows what it means. So like I say, I guess we'll see eventually what it means. I don't know if that's Spider Man in Doomsday or that Spider Man Secret Wars, because we do know Secret Wars will be coming up shortly. And guys, if you're watching this, please subscribe to my channel, Mizzy Real Talk, REEL, like a movie reel. That's where all my movies and all my stuff, far as film and stuff, will be at. But like I said, man, this movie, it was I seen some people saying it was their favorite Spider-Man ever. I don't want to react that fast. I kind of gotta let it sit because Spider-Man 2 probably still Spider-Man 2 is just up there, guys. It's one of the, as far as just superhero movies, period, it's up there. My favorite superhero movie ever is The Dark Knight. I don't know about everybody else, but The Dark Knight, that's like when you talking about like superhero perfection, that's it. And then of course Winter Soldier is one of them, Infinity War, Endgame. But like I say, this film, it was really good. Like I said, I just think it should have been more villains. It was kind of like, say, Jean and the girl who played Jean. I think she did a good performance, but it wasn't like a standout performance. It wasn't like just like, oh, that was she knocked that out of the park. It was a good performance. At the end, I started to feel like when she went into Peter mind, and then she's talking to Aunt May. That was a great performance. I seen a lot of people was talking about how they cried in this film. I didn't cry, but that was probably that and MJ with Peter was the two most emotional scenes, and them scenes were really good. They were really good, especially just her being like so mad and stuff. Damage Control literally killing her sister, like and her dealing with that. And also, guys, they didn't show this, but when Jean, when she stopped everybody in that whole radius, I forgot how far the radius Frank said, but I'm like, it had to be people got killed then, because it was people driving cars and stuff. So they don't show that, but I'm like, Jean had to kill, like, she had to kill some people when she did it. But like I say, you sometimes with Marvel, you can't think everything, because I even was wondering, like, far as connecting universes. If you watch the previous Daredevil, Kingpin is the mayor, is he's made a law that if you like mutant or something, you are not a mutant, a vigilante, you will be arrested. But on here, Spider Man is working, and Frank Castle working, practically with the police. So I'm like, is that the same timeline? Is it not? That's one thing about Marvel. I think after Endgame, it got kind of tricky for them filling in timelines. Then with Kane the Conquer, Jonathan Majors dealing with he dealt with. Now, oh, okay, we got to reset and now get a new villain, a whole new storyline. So like I say, Marvel just been in a weird space. I'm really hoping Doomsday. I hope Doomsday is the best Marvel movie ever. I just want Marvel to get back to the height that they once was at. I think this is a great step forward. I know Spider-Man is killing at the box office, but Spider-Man, you kind of gotta look at it standalone movie, because with Spider-Man movies, I think they're so big that even outside of Marvel, Spider-Man is just such a big entity that it's going to make money. And like I said, we'll see how the films go far as like I say the new the Doctor Doom, Doomsday. We'll see how that goes. But guys, like I say, man, I appreciate y'all. Like, comment, subscribe, share.